Sorry, I know we're live now, but are people going to join this Zoom meeting and are we going to see the people, or are they just going to see this through Facebook so we can't see them? I'm just a little confused as to how this works.
It'll just
Sorry.
be us on the Zoom call. Other people will watch on Facebook. But yes, I believe we are live. Excellent. So we are just going to give it a couple of minutes because we want to get people viewing on Facebook. But thank you all for joining us. For those of you watching, these are our incredible interns. Well, I think one thing we can do while we're waiting is if we can just go down the list and have everyone say their names one at a time. I'm Nick, I'm Stephanie's campaign manager, and I'll just be facilitating the conversation today. And I guess you guys can just shout it out in any order. Just your first name.
Hi, my name is Sue.
Hi, I'm Maya. I'm Charlotte.
Alex.
I'm Mason.
Hi, I'm Katya.
I'm Elizabeth.
I am Max.
I'm Dan.
I am Matt.
I'm Grace. I don't know. I didn't know what order we were going in.
I'm Michael.
Faria.
I'm Eula.
I'm Jessica.
I'm Kayla.
I'm Olivia.
Awesome. Well, thank you all. I think most people introduced themselves, but thank you all so much for coming on to talk about the issues that matter to you, especially as young people who are the next generation of voters. Largely you guys are in Connecticut, so largely the next generation of Connecticut voters. I'll get things started right now. I think we're really seeing that we're at an inflection point in our politics right now. A lot of the issues that have long been kind of boiling under the surface and causing lots of problems for people in society are really coming to a head right now. We've got anti-racism protests challenging systemic racism. The COVID-19 pandemic is really showing how flawed our healthcare system is. The economic recession has really made it clear the enormous level of wealth disparity in our country. So many of these movements that we've seen fighting for justice are really being driven by young people. And that includes this very campaign. The Stephanie Thomas campaign is being put forward so much by all of your efforts as our young interns on the campaign. We also have younger volunteers that get involved with the campaign. So you guys are really what's making this campaign a success, and we really appreciate it. And Stephanie especially really wants to elevate your voices. So that's why we're holding this event. We really want to just hear from you about the issues that matter to you and the kind of change you want to see in Connecticut and in this country. So we'll just start off with our first question, and please jump in whenever you have something to say. But you are all volunteering your time for Stephanie's campaign. So I just want to know what's driving you to get involved in politics in general. Just hop right in. No need to raise your hand.
I think personally, as you were saying, with everything that's coming to the surface right now and being brought to our attention with the anti-racist movement and climate change and COVID and everything, like I think that personally, I'm very passionate about like the movements that are occurring right now, and actually then making tangible change and like changing the system requires legislators and representatives who actually stand with what I believe in, and I know won't be like tempted by big money corporations who don't have our best interests in mind. And so working for like a political campaign that I actually believe in, I know can contribute to making that actual tangible change.
Absolutely. Who else?
Yeah, I think it's also super personal. All of these movements that are happening right now, they have to do with people's ability to live every day, and also have to do with our ability to live in the future. We're all younger people, and we're going to live in a world where the decisions we make now regarding climate change, regarding gun reform, regarding all these things, they'll have real implications for the lives that we can lead going into our adult lives, going into our 30s, 40s. And so it's really important for us to get involved now.
Couldn't agree more. Anyone else?
Yeah, I also think that like at this point, there's been issues that have kind of been mutating and have clearly boiled over at this point where, you know, we've had leadership that probably hasn't really been the best. And we have so many issues ranging from, you know, environmental issues to economic issues and college and healthcare. And there's so many things that now I think, especially like Generation Z is realizing that if we don't do something, the whole world is probably going to go up in flames sooner or later. So I think we all are, you know, aware enough to realize that this is important, and that at this point, no matter what party you align with or you're a part of, it's going to affect everybody.
Absolutely. Does that resonate with anyone else?
For sure, I think my my participation in local politics and state politics really stems from an anger towards the leadership at the federal level. I mean, people often discount the importance of state, local politics, but it really is the building blocks. I mean, it's the foundation of just our whole system. So it felt important to do whatever I can to help now, because I've become more politically aware due to all the infuriating things happening at the top.
Yeah, and just adding on to that, I think the state government is so important, especially like when the federal government is not necessarily doing what it should be doing or what you want it to be doing. It's really important for the government to step up and enact the policies that you support, and that's why I am getting involved with this campaign.
And it's never been so obvious as during the COVID-19 outbreak. I mean, because they really did kind of just leave the states out to dry. And then now Connecticut, due to our leadership that I believe in and I want to help escalate, they've gotten some of the best coronavirus rates.
So I was going to say the same thing that Grace said about our current government. You know, like in 2018, there wasn't really a, you know, big presidential election. We had a local races, and we had a, you know, Senate, some Senate, but not, and House races. And we were able to, you know, flip seats in Connecticut on a local level because so many people were getting involved in these local campaigns. And we were able to elect who is now our governor, Ned Lamont, who, you know, and I think if people hadn't started getting engaged and had this blue wave in 2018, we could have a totally different government in our state right now and have a totally different response that's similar to, you know, a state with a lot of high infection rate. And so, like Grace was saying, you know, it's that concept that all politics is local, and the things that like really impact us as individuals, especially for, you know, a lot of us are students or have just graduated or are just going to enter college, like all of those little decisions, you know, like healthcare and housing and, you know, financing public education and coronavirus response are just so relevant to like every day that we live our lives. And it has a much more immediate impact than, you know, federal legislation. So that's why I like local campaigns.
And that's a great thing to talk about. You know, there's a great, a huge number of different ways you can get involved in politics. And I'd be really curious to hear about why all of you guys are getting involved, one, in electoral politics, and two, in a local race for a candidate like Stephanie Thomas.
For me personally, it was definitely a conscious decision to try and go local. I think that, I mean, number one, it's a place where I feel like I can personally, make a little bit of a difference. And just because I think local politics is often just like not paid attention to enough, and people are focused on, national races, which are obviously very important. But oftentimes it's local politics that really like affects how we live. And I also just think that large scale change pretty much always has to come from the ground up and has to start somewhere. I think that local politics is a great way to do that.
I thought that local politics would be a really safe space to like learn and reconnect with I've lived abroad for the last 5 years, and so I've kind of felt like disconnected from the political sphere in America during what would be like referred to as like my formative years, I guess. And so I really wanted to like work on a campaign where I could just learn about politics in America, where I was like not really that comfortable, and just be like surrounded by people who are really passionate about issues that I'm really passionate about, and hear how people can like talk on those issues and be comfortable like defending their like thoughts and stuff like that. So that was why I was interested in working for Stephanie.
Yeah, one of the things that I wanted to build off of what Alex was talking about was that everybody, whether you're super into politics or not really into politics, at the end of the day, all politics is local. And one of the things is that when you start to get into politics, that whole realm sometimes feel like it's out of reach with your own daily life. And I think sometimes when we're just going through the motions, it's really, you sometimes forget that, it affects you and other people around you. And it is very, very overwhelming to, kind of be up to date on what's going on in the world, what's going on in the country. But the building blocks essentially starts with local change, and, getting people to see eye to eye on certain issues is really, just starting with your local community, because your local community, you're a part of your local community, and it's just really, really important to kind of dig your hands in something that you've been in for most of your lifetime. And everybody belongs somewhere in some sort of community, enclave, what may you what you want to call it. But after reading Stephanie's story, I personally it really resonated with me, being a poor minority woman trying to do change. So yeah, I just wanted to put that out there as well.
For me, it was definitely the fact that in Connecticut, we were starting to see, kind of this growing partisan politics or identity politics, where politicians are really working for their party rather than for their people. And, reading Stephanie's story and like who she wants to fight for, you can tell that she isn't a politician. She's a human being who's trying to work for the person or the people who will elect her in the 143rd district. I think it's just important that in local politics, we don't kind of see this development of national politics, which is so partisan and where things don't get done, as you can see in the Senate and in the House of Representatives in Washington, D.C. And it's just important that in Connecticut, we don't have that partisan identity politics where, Republicans are trying to block ways for the Secretary of State and make it to have people vote by mail in a pandemic, or for police reform to be passed. That shouldn't be identity or partisan politics. That should be just working for the people. So it's like people like Stephanie that need to be in Hartford that are not going to play identity or partisan politics, and really just work for the people, not just the people who elect her, but the people who she represents in general.
Absolutely. Anyone else have anything to say on that topic?
Yeah, I do. So like I agree, and I feel like at least for me, politics is all about helping people. Since I'm not the most well versed in STEM, and like volunteering at a hospital isn't really my strongest ability. I think like politics was a great way to like help my community and the people around me, especially in this time where it's decisive that we get this right, both on political and economic issues. And volunteering for a candidate like Stephanie Thomas, who like he was saying, like fights for everyone and does away with the partisan politics of Washington D.C. I feel like that's someone that all the community can get around, and just someone that I'm super willing to support and like help get elected, because she would do like a lot of great things for our community, and that's what this is all about, like community and the people.
Excellent. Anything else before we move on to another one? Oh, Charlotte, do you have your hand raised?
Yeah, but Joyce raised hers before me, so if
Oh.
she wants to go, she should go. Are you sure?
Yeah, you go ahead.
Okay.
We'll go to Joyce next.
So this was something just to piggyback off of something that Sue said about how like it affects everybody. Something else that made me want to get involved in politics, and especially locally, is, well, I've been, you know, in a household with two very liberal parents my entire life, so that was a huge influence. But another part of it was, at first I was kind of nervous to be a part of politics because I was worried about losing friends. And I was like, if I'm voicing my opinions, if I'm saying these things that I feel like are right, I have some friends who I know are going to disagree with me, and I don't want to lose them as friends, you know? But then as I got older and I became more well versed, and, you know, I was quietly educating myself without personally saying anything, I realized that it was really a privilege to not have to say anything, because I live where I live and I am who I am, and I'm white and I have white parents. And I just realized that, you know, lucky me, like I really don't have to say anything if I don't want to, but like, why shouldn't I? And it's important that because I know that I have privilege, and because I've like taken this time to educate myself, that's really important for like people like me, especially my age, come out and talk about things that they feel like are right and that will positively impact themselves and people around them too.
Absolutely, Joyce.
I was just going to reiterate some points that Sue, Max, and Michael brought up about, especially about community. I feel that local politics are just a really great way to kind of give back and fight for community, and people all around you have been learning about, but don't really know how to make. I feel like a lot of us as college and high school students, we learn about all these, we're living through so many different movements and times, that being able to kind of spark community change and local change is just a really great way to get involved. And also, I was just going to say that I remember my first phone bank, and the script was literally just us reaching out to people in the community and asking them if they needed help in times of COVID-19, things like that. And it was nothing political. It was just giving back to the community, making sure they're okay and they're.
Excellent. Well, thank you, Joyce, and thank you all. Any other comments before we move on? Awesome. Well, our next topic we wanted to talk about is that, you know, the decisions that previous generations largely are making now are really going to impact the course of our lives. We're going to be living with the results of these decisions much longer, obviously. And so if you could tell the adults in the room about the consequences of their actions, and how would you talk to them, and what should they be doing to leave us a better Connecticut, a better country, and a better world?
To be frank, I would talk to adults in the room less about their actions that they've been taking and more about their inaction. I feel like a lot of older politicians are viewing Donald Trump as a singular entity, that his corrupt nature as a politician is just him, when in reality it's a byproduct of corrupt systems and corrupt things that allowed him to get to that position. He's just the most brashly corrupt position. He's not the there's people like Tom Cotton. It's like, it's bad and it's been there. And I think they need to realize that these are systematic issues that aren't immediately absolved the second Joe Biden is elected or Donald Trump is out of office. That is something I'd say to them, is that Donald Trump, you can hate on him and stuff, but people elected him. Think about why. It's because the political system abandoned a lot of people, and also we promote like racial things, but whatever. Yeah. That's also a thing.
Yeah, and also to piggyback off of that, like beyond the Trump phenomenon and all the systems that allowed him to be elected, there are still tons of issues that are going on independent of Trump, like the climate crisis, which if we don't start fixing now, like even if we are each doing our best, it still might not be enough for us to live in a world with a stable climate. There are places across the world right now where they are seeing huge monsoons, giant lightning storms, and things, and damage that might be irreversible. And that will be coming to our front doors much quicker than we realize. So in addition to all the issues that Trump and his ilk bring along, there are also a bunch of other issues that maybe the adults in the room have put to the wayside that are now causing huge issues for us and are going to be the main issues for us going forward.
He's a very big attention grabber. He kind of takes up the room in a lot of things, and I think we need to realize that there's things around him that we need to focus on.
I think going with what Daniel was talking about with climate change, it's not just the fact that climate is changing, but it's the fact that there's a ton of other impacts that come from it. For example, pandemics are much more likely to happen. And we didn't have, we had a response to this that was stripped away from, people fired and people, we could have handled it in a way like European countries did, where by now they're opening up. But, the fact that with our, the things that are causing climate change that are also causing us to be in closer proximity with animals, because their habitats are being destroyed. And so a lot of our, contact with our food and with our property and land that we're using will also, that's a higher likelihood. I think also like things like education and healthcare, if we don't start to actually fix those, it's going to be also irreversible in the way that, we're just going to be behind as a country and behind as, a society from where we should be, especially regarding human rights and, equality among citizens.
I would say just don't try to be politically correct. Don't try to follow trends. Don't wait for New Haven to be the next city that is going to be underwater. Don't wait until you can't go to Hammonasset Beach anymore because climate change is affecting that. Don't wait for the next, Black kid who lives across the street from you to be the victim to a police shooting. Don't wait for these, political trends that the national media tends to hop on, because when we follow those political trends and when we try to be woke in the moment, we kind of forget everything else after, and no action is really taken, because a white person or a woke white liberal can say Black Lives Matter in the moment, but if your actions don't speak to it, if your voting doesn't speak to it, then there is no there's no actual point in you saying it or supporting it. So it's just really important that we don't try to follow political trends. And you can even see that through COVID-19, where I was even someone who was back in February at UConn saying COVID wasn't going to happen. I was planning spring break. I was, going out with my friends. I was, at Huskython, where literally thousands of people were gathered in a small space. Meanwhile, COVID was spreading throughout Connecticut at the time. and we didn't even know it. It's because we wanted to follow political trends and wait for someone to tell us to wear a mask, wait for someone to tell us that it's not safe to go outside, wait for someone to tell us that we should stay home. It's just really important that we don't follow political trends anymore, and we just try to be as human as possible and as equal as possible.
Michael, really?
Sorry, go ahead.
No, it's okay. Are you sure?
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay. Michael really took the words right out of my mouth. I was going to say something really similar, but just to kind of add on to what he said, I think that, and this is to the adults, is that, and this is a product of, you know, two-party politics, is that I feel like a lot of adults, rather than, you know, voting for a candidate because they believe that they're going to do what's right and that they have plausible, positive policies, they just want to follow with their party. And I want adults and just everyone in general to know that it's okay to say, I'm a registered Republican, but I'm not going to vote Republican because I don't agree with this. And I feel like it's just kind of, people would rather vote for something that they know is wrong than swallow their pride and admit that they were wrong and that they no longer agree with Donald Trump or they no longer support him. And personally, I have a lot of Republican family members who I've talked to them and been like, a vote for Trump is a vote against me. It's a vote against my friends. It's a vote against your friends. And it's not, at this point, you need to really go beyond what party you've aligned with historically and really take into consideration what policies you actually want to see mandated in the United States and in Connecticut.
Yeah, and so far I've been agreeing with everybody that's really putting their voice out there. And one of the things that I could really advise the adults watching here today is to listen, and not just listen, please actively listen, because one of the things that I feel like the younger generation, our generation, is really trying to do is that, you know, quite frankly, we're going to stand up against certain things that's been happening historically, and we need you guys to listen, because a lot of the protests and many of the turmoil that's happening right now is a product of us standing up. But one of the things that we need also from you guys is to utilize your platforms and really step out of your comfort zone, because as the United States is getting more and more polarized, quite frankly, one of the things we definitely need is unity as the younger generation, and using your platform to bring awareness to these issues, speaking out against things that are wrong or hurtful to members of our community. And just beyond that, just for the sake of us being human beings together, I think that's something that can be forgotten in politics. And we all need to really remember that politics beyond votes, beyond looking at people like numbers, potential voters, we also really need to remember to look out for each other. And I think that tends to get lost and be dehumanized in politics. So yeah.
I agree 100% with that. I think that in today's kind of polarized political world, we do forget that the other side are people just like us, and that we shouldn't really see ourselves as Republicans or Democrats or something else, but that we're all Americans, and that in order to solve America's problems and the problems of the future, that we all really have to work together, because such a polarized partisan environment it's gonna slow things down, and it isn't gonna get the change that we really need.
I will say as a caveat to that though, like we shouldn't need to use that as like sort of an excuse to not get the policies that need to go through happen, because yes, we do need unity. Yes, we do need to work together to fix America's problems, but some issues don't have like a middle ground. Like for example, having Confederate statues up is something that like you're either being racist or you're not. There's no like, you can't like cut the statue in half, and we shouldn't be using like moderacy or like we need to come together as a country as an excuse to like not not get the policies that need to happen to move America forward into the future happening.
I somewhat agree with you, but again, I think I agree slightly more with Mason and Sue in that, for example, when you were saying the Confederate statues, I think I would say the whole country is mostly united on that, and I would say all Democrats and I think most Republicans actually would support the notion of bringing down the Confederate statues. But I think especially now, it's more important to see like the Republicans and more conservatives as our allies rather than our enemies. And I think in many ways we could work together to solve the problems in our country. For example, with a gun policy, which is something I researched back in 10th grade. Like although it's true that we need more harsh gun measures and make it harder to buy like high caliber rifles and such that could inflict harm on many more people. I think it's also important to look at the fact that 2/3 of gun deaths are suicides, and that while it's also a problem of purchasing guns, it's also a mental health problem as well. And while looking at both sides, we could actually find more cohesive measures to combat gun problems in our country.
I think
Yeah.
we should. Oh, sorry. I think we should. Oh, what? I think we should also just recognize why politics are so partisan right now. I think we understand from Mason and Max that we really crave unity right now. We don't want to be so divided. America is one nation, and we don't want to be fighting with our neighbors and our family. And I think we should realize that Trump and his cronies, I don't consider them to really be true Republicans or someone with actual political agenda. They're people after power, to be perfectly frank. People like Mitch McConnell that don't want to hear the other side. They'll just kill the bill in the Senate. I think we need to recognize that Donald Trump at every turn has used, he has exacerbated partisan divides to his advantage. Like we could have had a really good moment of COVID-19. We're one nation. Everyone's getting sick. Doesn't matter if you're red or blue. We could have had a real cohesive moment, but no, we decided it was a hoax perpetuated by Democrats. So I think if you're a Republican and you crave like unity and you want to recognize like the other side and work with them, you need to realize that that won't happen through Donald Trump. I think we need to stop focusing. Charlotte said this earlier. I'm pretty sure we need to stop focusing. You can't just go by party loyalty.
I think it's also important to note the fact that not everything stems back to Donald Trump in politics. You know, while he is someone who is, you know, taking the handle on like almost everything that you see on your media, whether it be social or the news, it's important that this type of partisan politics has been established for many, many, many years. That goes back to, you know, the 60s and 50s and 40s, and there have been worse times where, you know, you've seen partisan politics play, you know, the deepest of evilest acts that you see. I know down in the South, you know, you had your Republicans who would make Black people take literacy tests and purposely misspell certain words and then have them say that that word that they spelled was incorrect just so that they couldn't vote. So I think it's just important that we understand that Donald Trump is not the making of this. He's just someone who is, you know, putting this out in the public. It's important that we don't just run against Donald Trump. We run against the issues. I don't like to, you know, say I'm voting because Donald Trump's in office. I'm voting because there's Supreme Courts that need to be filled in within the next 4 years that are going to take, you know, acts on abortion, that are going to take acts on voting rights, that are going to take look up acts on, you know, electoral college like they did today. I'm voting to fill in judges that are going to be moving forward on things like Muslim bans, which Donald Trump, you know, in the Republican Party now still wants to move forward on, taking away healthcare as well. All of those things are really important that have, you know, been Republican values for a very long time. And it's just really important that we understand that that we can't put a name on issues. We have to just address the issues as is.
Donald, like, to piggyback off that, I said something like that earlier. I think Donald Trump is a person who purposely inflames the wound, but he isn't the wound, and the wound can only really be stitched up by actual, like, serious systematic change that a lot of Democrats, frankly, a lot of Democrats in power right now, the adults in the room, aren't paying attention to. They just want to go back to like the Obama days when Obama had his own issues. It's like we need to think about the big picture here and not just Donald Trump, because in the end, if he wins re-election, he'll be gone in 4 years. And then who's to say that if we don't change anything, someone worse could come along? Yeah.
I think something that, people haven't really brought up with regards to kind of, Max was saying and what Sue was saying and Mason is actually, in Congress, there's a lot of bills that do get passed that don't make the news because they're things that are not big, divisive, big topic issues. I worked on Capitol Hill last year, and a lot of the stuff that was going through and was being passed, like they were really simple, like things for infrastructure and things that are not, abortion or the or even like paycheck fairness or things that cause big rifts between the parties. I do, however, think that like Daniel was saying, there are some policy topics where there really aren't two sides to it. It's something that there is one side, and then people try and come up with these reasons against it that are not really what's best for people and for the country. And I think so that on a like in the House of Representatives, people are very responsive to constituents because it's a smaller set of people that you are responding to, and we would get calls every day from constituents talking about issues, and have to write them down. And that is very true on the local level as well. And that's what makes local politics like so great, is that your representative is really there for you. Like if 5 people bring up an issue that's important to them, then that state representative actually has to like start thinking about it, because that could cost them an election. Basically, it's very it's much more direct, but it's also an instance where these big divisive issues don't really have as much in play, because it's a lot of things like transportation, improving Metro North, or even tolls, that has become a political issue that really doesn't need to be a partisan issue. And I think a lot of these people like to latch on to the big fancy, big, like flashy issues that get a lot of media attention, which is not everything that happens in government and in politics. So I just wanted to say that.
Yeah, I'd also like to add that especially on like Capitol Hill, all of these politicians are friends. Like they're all friends. They all eat dinner at the same place. They all know each other's families. And so the fights that the battles that we fight on behalf of them are very different from the battles that they have with each other. And it's our job to sort of like recognize that and look at like, what does it, like we can be friends. Republicans and Democrats and people in between or outside of that can all be friends with each other. But it's also important to like disagree with things when you see an injustice or something wrong that's happening, because those people that are friends not because it's because of friends outside of the fact that they disagree with each other.
That's period. Because I think a hard pill to swallow for a lot of people is that we can't sit here, like, even if you are a Democrat, you can't sit here and say that all Democratic candidates actually care about people. It's not at this point like, Jeffrey Epstein, Donald Trump, and Bill Clinton all sat at the same table. Like, we need to step away from like standing or like being obsessed with a particular candidate and, pay more attention to what they actually stand for. Personally, I think it's weird when people have like Trump flags, you do you, but when they have Trump flags, I mean, like, we really have to look at the whole person, the whole picture, and really step outside of our like party beliefs. Otherwise, we're all going to be negatively affected, because there's no such thing as a perfect candidate. But at the end of the day, you can't just be loyal to a candidate or to a party simply because you have been historically or because of one particular issue that they agree with you on.
I think to go off what everyone's been saying, I think pretty much all Republicans and frankly some Democrats have a lot to gain by us feeling so like polarized, because at the end of the day, a lot of their policies end up hurting most of their constituents. So I do think that we have to kind of recalibrate our approach to politics and just like the way we think about it, as not so much like a cultural thing, but like as, you know, about our actual interests in our lives and, you know, whether we can get educated and get good jobs and get healthcare for us and, you know, our families.
Yeah, I think a lot of these politicians, they really benefit from you looking at the minuscule details and kind of focusing your attention off to ignore the fact that their policies probably are only benefiting them and the top like rich people. So I think we need to like, especially because I mean 99% of this country aren't billionaires, but like a lot of the policies they benefit the billionaires. So it's like we need to all kind of be able to see that common thread where it's like we're all kind of getting effed here by these policies. So we need to be able to band together. And I think a lot of the media today, Republican media, which are run by like heirs and like billionaires like Tucker Carlson and stuff like that, and they pretend to be for the people, but in reality they're just trying to distract you from the real issues, I think.
I think going back to what Charlotte said, I really agree. I think that people need to start voting not like for a party, but like for a candidate and actually doing the research and the legwork for like what that candidate stands for, what policies, if they've shown in the past, like before they even ran, that they care about people and they care about issues more than just the ones that'll impact them. Like I've noticed when I'm calling people on phone banks, I've had so many people that answer the phone as soon as they hear that Stephanie is a Democratic candidate. They're like, okay, cool, I'll vote for her. Gotta go, bye-bye. And I'm like, that's really great. Like, I love Stephanie as a candidate. I think that she'd be great. So I'm so glad you support. But like, I really think that you should let me tell you about her issue stances so you can do the research, because like it's just the responsible thing to do at this point. There's too much at stake to just vote for random people.
Yeah, I absolutely agree with Katya. I think I've when I'm phone banking, there are so many people who like I'll just say Stephanie is a Democrat, and then they're like, oh my God, like yes, I'll definitely vote for her. And it's while that's awesome, and obviously we want more votes for Stephanie. I think we definitely have to take the responsibility to do the research and not vote just across party lines, and recognize what candidates are supporting what values and what actions they're taking, because that's the only way we're really going to create change. And I think there's a lot of inaction going right now, and a lot of people saying they're passionate about certain causes, and as people were talking about earlier, like saying Black Lives Matter, but what are you doing to take action towards making that change? And I think that's really critical at this point.
It's not like people don't have the time to do the research now. Like if anything, like this is the time to be spending, you know, researching. Obviously, no one else has this much time usually.
I think a big thing I hear a lot is that people say they lean Republican because of the economy. And I think it's kind of important to point out that you can go on Stephanie's website, and she's really into, you know, taking care of our district's infrastructure. And that's massive for like the economy of our district. We have so many people commuting to New York, Hartford. So really pouring money into our infrastructure is going to help our economy. So I think the idea that just because you have a feeling that like Republicans may be better with money, you know, maybe if you did some research into Stephanie's campaign, you would find that she might be putting our tax dollars to better work for our economy.
Great thoughts, guys. This has been a very intriguing discussion. Are there any last points on this topic before we move on to one other? All right, well, the next thing I wanted to ask you all about is that this is a Stephanie's running in a state legislative race, running to represent the towns of Wilton, Westport, and Norwalk in the state legislature. So if you could magically have the state legislature change any law or process at the state level, what would you have them do?
I guess I'll start just because I work on research for the campaign, and one thing I was actually researching recently is insurance costs and healthcare costs in Connecticut. And I don't know how many people know about this, but there was a public auction, essentially healthcare plan that was, oh, I'm here. Did I cut out?
Cut out for a second.
My internet's very bad, but basically, just to sum up, I don't know where I cut out, but it was basically public auction got shut down in Connecticut by big insurance companies, and I didn't know about this before I did the research, and so to me, that's a huge, huge, huge issue, especially in COVID-19 times and in the aftermath of what it will be. That A, demonstrates the undue influence of big corporations in even state and local legislature, and also demonstrates sort of the changing structure of the economy from huge privatized corporations to a more centralized economy at the state level.
I think an issue I think Connecticut has to address, I don't really have any specific policy in mind, but as a resident of Westport, very affluent, 92% white, I think we have a really big problem with racial disparities. I think we have places like Bridgeport. I went to a Black Lives Matter rally in Fairfield, and it was this girl talking about how their school doesn't get like good school supplies in Bridgeport, and then I'm a student of Staples High School, a public school, and I'm thinking about how we have like so many resources. There was a whole scandal about how like we had like a bunch of excess in our budget, so we just spent it on menial things, and it just makes you really think about how a 92% white town gets all these great school opportunities, and then minority towns, they just get nothing. And I think we really need to address that issue, and people don't want to, because Connecticut is, my family moved from Staten Island to Connecticut because of the school system. Like, we have a reputable school system in white areas, and I think people don't want to mess with that or try and reform it, but I think we really need to address things. And I think that's something we really have to think about, that we have to disrupt the regular, like the status quo of things just because they work for some people. Like, we have to disrupt it and try and make it work for everyone, if that makes sense.
I will say as well, something that has been an issue in Connecticut as someone who drives in this state is that the roads are constantly under construction, and sometimes in places like Waterbury, for example, the roads will be under construction for decades, and it won't end. Like the construction on I-84 recently ended maybe like a year or 2 years ago. And it was huge because like that construction project had been going on for years, and every day during rush hour, you would be stuck in traffic for like a half hour, maybe 45 minutes. And that puts a huge strain, I think, on Connecticut's economy and our ability to attract new businesses, but also like people need to go into cities in order to get to their jobs, and jobs are very scarce at this moment in time. And so it's something that needs to be addressed in the state. Like, how do we maybe speed up some of the construction processes or make them more efficient, or just like find the areas where the construction is needed most and get to work on them.
I had just previously interned at the Secretary of State. Well, I'm still doing some work for them, but a big problem in Connecticut is it's like one of the hardest states in America to register to vote, and something Stephanie supports that I think will be really good for our district would be getting a wider voting base, which means making it easier automatic registration to vote. I think that would be very good for our district.
to piggyback off of that, a specific thing, I think we need to start making no excuse needed mail-in ballots available, because Connecticut is like a working state. People go, they don't have time always to like go out and vote. And I think we're one in only 17 states right now that doesn't have mail-in vote, no excuse mail. That means like you don't need an excuse to register for mail-in. And then I was actually researching for another campaign the reasons you need to be able to mail in vote outside of the pandemic. We have made that available, obviously. And it's some of the most restrictive. And I think that if you want to promote, in 2018, there was a huge surge of young voters because, 2016, there was a huge swell in young voters because it was an important election. And I think if we want to maintain that and get young people more involved in politics, young people who are working jobs that they can't always get time off to do, then we have to make no excuse needed mail-in ballots available to people.
In addition to that, I also I worked at UConn getting students to vote in the 2018 local races, gubernatorial race, and we had a huge problem where a ton of students weren't registered to vote, whether it was within the stores like area, and they wanted to vote in stores, and they didn't get an absentee, or they just didn't know that there was an election because it wasn't a big presidential year, and so they weren't registered to vote. And on the day of the election, because we actually have same day registration in Connecticut, basically you can register up until 30 days before, or something like that. Michael could correct me, before the election, then you can't register to vote until the day of the election. And so we had a ton of students who missed that deadline, and we had hundreds of students at our the stores, the Mansfield Town Hall, waiting in line to register to vote. And we actually ended up having people in line after almost after the polls were closed, and not having been registered to vote because it was taking so long and it was so overpowered. I think we need automatic voter registration for everyone basically who is eligible to vote, because then people don't even have to fill out the form, even though actually we do have an online system, and it's very easy. People just don't really think of that when they turn 18. I have to register to vote. So also, I think I personally am a fan of ranked choice voting, because I think that our primary system, which Stephanie's not running in a primary, which is great because we don't have to focus on that. But our primary systems are a winner take all for a plurality, meaning that if you get the most votes, you win. And what really that means is that more people voted against you than voted for you if you didn't get a 50% or above. So in some ways, that's somewhat how we had Donald Trump in the first place, because the Republican primary, he won a plurality, but he didn't win a majority of voters. So I think that that's something that we can do, in our local primaries, and in our federal primaries. For Maine does it now. They just started having ranked choice, and because then that way, if you put a second person, it's like a runoff without having to actually do a runoff election. You just have who the next closest candidate is, and you can get somebody who actually gets that majority, and then that a majority of people support this person. So that's something that doesn't come up too often, but that's a very passionate issue of mine.
For me, it definitely, I think Connecticut sucks at is mental health and addressing it, especially amongst as young people and especially amongst young Black and brown people. We just don't invest enough in our education system towards mental health. We invest in more security guards that just sit around the hallway than we do for children that need, and teenagers that need mental health. We don't try to try to infuse into our a part of our physical education, mental education, and how you need to, in order to be physically healthy, you need to be mentally healthy, and ways to be mentally healthy. And if you are impacted through mental health, how the resources that you can have. I think Stephanie, she's already a champion on that. And I think that if she was elected, she would, really bring that forth to the floor and in Hartford, and just to make it, more known in Connecticut that our young population especially suffers a lot from mental health issues that are not addressed. And if we don't address those mental health issues, the future of Connecticut doesn't look so bright, because those people will continue to suffer from the mental health issues if they don't receive that help. So that's just something I think really does need to be addressed. I prefer it be addressed now, but if we do have to wait for someone like Stephanie to be in Congress, excuse me, in the Representatives House in Hartford, then that is something I would look forward to when she is elected.
One of the issues that I'm also very invested in, and something that Connecticut needs to address, is the incarceration rate. Definitely on a federal level, this needs to be resolved, absolutely, but also in a local level as well. A lot of people get the they have the impression that because Connecticut is more of a progressive state, that all policies across the board are on the progressive side. But in terms of incarceration in Connecticut, like in the federal level as well, it disproportionately affects communities of color, especially the Black and Latinx community. And I think that's really important to, realize that and say, hey, this is absolutely something that is an issue, not only at the federal level, but in Connecticut. And because of this unexpected wave of COVID-19 throughout these past few months, a lot of people in prisons have suffered through unnecessary, have caught COVID-19 when really they really didn't need to. And it's really unfortunate that, the state's response to COVID-19 in jails and prisons, we got a grade of F+. So we really need to understand that, there needs to be something that needs to be done about the incarceration rate, move toward rehabilitation over retributive policies, especially when it comes to the criminal justice system and prisons. And also it's more of like a human rights issue. So yeah.
Excellent. Well, are there any final thoughts before we end?
I think one of the most important issues to me is climate change, because our Earth has already reached so many tipping points, or like surpassed these points, where we can't like reverse the damages that we've already done. And even though Connecticut is already doing they're enacting a lot of policies, or like taking plastic bags out of grocery stores, I think there can never really be enough policies to really help combat climate change and the issues that our Earth is facing, because I think there are a lot of really important issues that we need to deal with, like systematic racism and that's very important. But often climate change is overlooked, just because our Earth has always been here, but people need to realize that it might not be the same state that it should be in forever.
I'm so glad you brought that up, actually, and I think there have been some strides forward in terms of climate change. Also, local levels, we can do things to help the Earth. And I think an overlooked way that we can help with the issue of climate change is actually through solar energy.
I think your mic is covered.
Yeah, your mic might be covered.
We heard you at the beginning, okay, Max, but then I think it faded out a bit.
I can repeat that. So I was saying that I think we can do more to focus on the environmental aspects in terms of local and state levels. And I think a great way to do that is through solar energy. And it's been studied that Connecticut is the second best state in for watts per dollar at 8.94, second to only Hawaii. And so not only would investing in solar energy be good for the environment, but also good for our economy, which is something that many people have brought up, like Michael with transportation. But if more people got behind the issue of solar energy, I think it could be a good investment in both those aspects for our state.
I agree with Max, and I think another important thing that Stephanie's planning to implement is carbon tax, because it creates an incentive for people to care about the environment and make actions because you're bringing the economy in with it. So I think Stephanie's plan to bring renewable energy sources in addition to a carbon tax would be really effective and really important.
There are also a lot of like carbon emission reducing policies that can reduce the costs in the state, including like filtration systems across the Long Island Sound, which is like a huge border with Connecticut. If we improve those areas in terms of like growing plants, making sure that they are more green and have more carbon reducing elements in them, we can get cleaner water, get more oxygen, but also then beautify the place, make it more accessible for people. So there are a bunch of positives.
Great. Well, I really appreciate you guys all sharing your thoughts. It's so wonderful to hear that you are all thinking about these important issues and that you're really taking actions to push them forward and work towards some solutions. You know, I'm so proud to be working on this campaign with you all. I think like seeing you guys all get involved with the campaign, making phone calls, you know, writing up press releases, doing the hard work that it takes to get a candidate elected. It's just been so inspiring for me. I know it's something that really drives Stephanie. I'm so proud of you all. You're doing an excellent job. So thank you so much for this event. I think it's been wonderful. And thank you to those of you who have been watching us live on Facebook.